All right, here we go. Eric, you could shut off the little timer there. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on general data testing with QuerySurge. My name is Bill Hayduck. I'm the CEO of RTTS, which is the parent company of QuerySurge. This is the first in a four-part series on automating your data validation and ETL testing. And each one of these webinars' target time frame is 30 minutes. Our goal is to keep them short and to the point. So thanks, Eric. Eric Smythe, our QuerySurge's Director of Alliances, will be kicking off the webinar with a presentation, a short slide deck on general data testing, and then he's going to go into a demo. Matt Moss, who's QuerySurge's product manager, will be answering any questions you may have, which reminds me, if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A panel. We'll answer as many as we can after Eric's demo. Again, the goal is to keep this short. If we don't get to your question, we'll email you with the answer afterwards. Also, please use the chat to alert us if you have any issues seeing or hearing the session. Thanks again for your time and participation. Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for all those attending. As Bill mentioned, my name is Eric Smythe. I'm the Director of Alliances at RTTS, which is the parent company of QuerySurge. I'm going to present a few slides to provide an overview of QuerySurge and how it's used for data testing before we jump into the product demonstration. So I'd like to start with the QuerySurge business case. We know that executives make critical business decisions based off of their BI and analytic reports, and the assumption is that the underlying data behind these reports is accurate. But due to work with partners and customers, we know that's not always the case. Bad data can be introduced into the architecture, which can affect the accuracy and validity of these reports. How does that happen? Well, data comes from many different sources and typically gets loaded into a data warehouse through an ETL process. That data will move to one or more data marts that eventually feed into those reports. At the same time, there could be a data lake in the architecture. There could be a migration project going on, as well as different ERP systems that are feeding data directly to the data warehouse or the reports. And anytime data is moving from one system to another, there's a possibility of a defect being introduced. And that's the area where QuerySurge plays. We help detect defects as data moves through your various systems. So what is QuerySurge? It's the smart testing solution for automated validation and testing of data. Our use cases are listed here. Customers use QuerySurge to test their data warehouse and ETL processes as data comes over from those various sources to verify that it's loaded into the data warehouse correctly. QuerySurge can also validate big data systems, whether it's Hadoop or MongoDB or some of the cloud architectures that are out there. QuerySurge has the capability to connect to those and validate that the data is being loaded into those systems as well. We have a good DevOps continuous testing story. QuerySurge has a full functioning API that allows it to be integrated and driven from any type of build pipeline tool. QuerySurge is very useful for data migration projects or data modernization projects where you want to compare data pre-migration to data post-migration to make sure that the new environment has all the correct information. We have specific drivers used to test BI reports where we can capture data from the various visualizations that you'll see in a report and can compare that data to other reports or graphs or other systems. And then lastly, enterprise app ERP testing. If you have many different data feeds coming into your ERP solution and want to verify that that information is coming in correctly, QuerySurge can be used to validate that as well. QuerySurge has over 150 customers in 30 different countries. You can see a sample customer list here. We have a more extensive list on our website. But one of the things I always like to point out here is if you take a look at some of these companies, it really spans all different vertical markets. So whether your organization is in finance or pharmaceuticals or healthcare, commerce, technology, all these organizations were struggling with a way how they can effectively test and automate their data testing, and found that QuerySurge was the solution to help them get to where they needed to go. So how does QuerySurge work in regards to data testing? Well, QuerySurge has a concept of a test, which we call a query pair. And what this test does is it connects to any two data points at the time of execution. So when you design the test, you'll specify a source system, which could be a traditional database, a mainframe, flat file, or web service. And you'll also specify a target system, which could be a data lake, a data warehouse, or a BI report. And at the time of execution, what QuerySurge will do is it will request data from both source and target systems, and it will retrieve that data in a comparable result set. and QuerySurge will analyze every single cell of every single record. As you can imagine, if you were trying to do this manually, there's going to be a limitation as far as how much data you can test. But with QuerySurge, we have customers testing millions and billions of records, and it will be able to pinpoint any type of data mismatches, such as maybe records from your source system that didn't make it into your target system, or maybe you were doing an aggregate calculation with some of your source data and the value displayed in your target database is incorrect, or any other type of data anomaly that you can think of as part of your testing. And what QuerySurge will do is it'll take all that information, display it in reports and graphs to give you good insight into the health of your data, as well as be able to send automatic email notifications anytime an issue arises. From a process standpoint, if you take a look at the data sources all the way on the left, that data will make its way through this simplified data architecture until it eventually gets to the BI reports. Well, how does that data move from component to component? We know that developers will take some type of requirement or mapping document and will script something or use some type of product that will move the data from one system to the other and transform that data if necessary to fit into the new schema. So what testers do in using QuerySurge is they can create tests around these different endpoints, and after these jobs run that are going to move data from a source to a target, QuerySurge can execute its tests, and we're able to pinpoint exactly which job introduced the defect and where the bad data came into the architecture. Some of the benefits of QuerySurge, we have a concept of projects. So if you have some high sensitive data that other groups, other testers within your group cannot see, you can create a separate project in QuerySurge, only give users to that access to that project who should have access to that secure data, and it makes it very easy to separate out the work that's being done. We polled the industry and found anywhere from 75 to 80% of all data testing is what's called non-transformational or pass-through mappings, which require little transformation logic. For those types of tests, we've developed our Query Wizard. It's a graphical component of our product that allows you to easily build tests using drag and drop functionality without having to write any code at all. For your more sophisticated tests, we have a design library that enables you to perform complex tasks that has a lot of nice features. We have parameterization with snippets. We have thresholding features, which enables you to pass tests based off of a valid range of values. We have a staging area that allows you to park data temporarily, and a bunch of other things that allow you to create these custom tests more and make them more robust. Everything within QuerySurge is designed with automation in mind. So we're able to take all of the tests that you develop, group them into suites, execute them across multiple agents to cut down on your overall testing time. QuerySurge has the capability to test across a wide variety of different platforms. In almost all cases, we're able to capture the data and use it as part of our testing effort, no matter what type of system it resides in. We have a fully fleshed out API, which pretty much has every command that you can do through the user interface can be done through API calls, which means you can automate most of your processes around data testing. And lastly, we have data analytics and data intelligence reports. We have widgets, a reporting section, which gives you great insight into the overall health of your data. And we also can provide backend access, which means you have the ability to write any type of query you want to pull the information out of the QuerySurge database and collect those metrics and display them in reports or graphs. You can also point your own BI tool at the QuerySurge backend as well. A little bit about the QuerySurge environment. QuerySurge gets deployed on its own server, has its own backend database and application server. Users are going to access QuerySurge through their browser. And QuerySurge has a concept of agents, and these agents are used to execute suites of tests in parallel. So the more agents that you have running, the more suites that you can run through QuerySurge, which means the less time it will take to complete all of your test executions. QuerySurge supports all your major browsers. It runs on Windows and Linux operating systems, and you can install QuerySurge either on a physical machine, on a virtual machine, or in the cloud. One important note here, QuerySurge is not a multi-tenant SaaS solution. QuerySurge gets deployed either on your physical hardware or within your private cloud architecture, and the customers of QuerySurge have complete control of their data at all times. So that alleviates a lot of security concerns where some customers may worry about their data leaving their systems. And QuerySurge is a Java application, which means it connects to all these different technologies using JDBC drivers. QuerySurge comes bundled with about 15 different drivers. Those are drivers that we've either developed ourselves, or they're open source, or we have a relationship with the vendor and they allow us to bundle our drivers with our solution. But for any of the others, in most cases, you can simply go to their website, download the latest JDBC driver, place that driver onto a QuerySurge agent, and then it can be used for any of the tests that you're going to look to construct. We also have a partnership with a company called CData, which is a driver company, and their drivers can also be included as part of any QuerySurge purchase. QuerySurge's API allows it to be driven from any type of ETL or build or test management solution. So whether you're driving your test from a tool like Informatica, or you have a build pipeline set up in Azure DevOps, or you want to run your tests from test cases in Micro Focus ALM, QuerySurge's API gives you the ability to run your tests from any of these types of solutions and have the tests run and the results be fed back. So for instance, you might set up a build pipeline that looks something like this, where your first step in the pipeline is to execute an ETL job. Once that job is complete, you'd ask to execute the tests that are used to validate that job through our API. QuerySurge will run and execute those tests and bring the results back to the pipeline. And assuming the tests were successful, you can go ahead and move on with the next stage of the pipeline. But if there are some issues, you can put conditional logic in your pipeline to say, well, if the tests fail, we want to run a rollback procedure, and you'll get an automatic email notification that gets sent out anytime there is a failure from QuerySurge. So hopefully that provides you a high-level overview of what QuerySurge does and how it works. What I'm going to do now is transition over to our product demonstration. So what you can see.
Great, and again, just remind everybody, if you have any questions, just go into chat, and to Q&A and post your questions, and Matt Moss, our product manager, will answer them right after Eric's demo. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, thank you, Bill. So as I mentioned, QuerySurge is a web application. So when users go to their browser and they first log in, the first thing they're going to see is their dashboard. The dashboard is user specific, so users can configure the dashboard to see any type of information that's relevant to them. QuerySurge is a web-based application, but what you'll see is it works very similar to desktop apps. You have drag and drop functionality. You'll also see right-click menus when you click on any of the items that exist within QuerySurge. These dashboards are configurable, so you can have multiple panes. You can add and remove panes, delete them through our Add Widget console. So if I have additional panes I need to add them, I can drag and drop them into QuerySurge to showcase those features. I'm just going to drill into one of our reports just to give you some insight into some of the metrics that QuerySurge can capture. What we're looking at here is our scenario outcome, the data reliability report. And what this is showcasing is we're monitoring a specific set of tests called shipping. And this test is being repeatedly executed on a regular basis. And what it's showing is we're getting pretty consistent results. Every time this runs, we're getting about 132,000 verifications that are passing, 33,000 verifications that are failing, which means our data is about 80% accurate. Now, that's a pretty low number. You'd probably want your data in the high 90s, but this is a demo environment, so we have some intentional defects in here to showcase some of QuerySurge's capabilities. But of course, the idea here is if that blue line dips down or that those red bars shoot up, that means you're getting more bad data in your system than you've done on previous runs, and that might be something you want to investigate. And all these different widgets are configurable, so you can monitor. In this case, I'm monitoring this shipping scenario, but you have the ability to monitor other scenarios and kind of display these reports that are going to bring back relative information to what you need to see on a day-to-day basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition over to our design library. This is where we construct the different query pairs or tests that QuerySurge is going to execute. You'll see it has a customized folder structure, and I can drill into one of these folders, and what you'll see are the individual query pairs. Each query pair will have a name, who last modified it, and it will have the status of the last execution of that particular test. If I go ahead and drill into one of these query pairs, what you'll see is the query pair is comprised of two sides. We have a source side on the left and a target side on the right. Both source and target will have a connection drop down. This specifies what you're defining as your source data store and what you're defining as your target data store. Customers will typically have maybe 5 or 10 different types of connections that they're working with on a day-to-day basis. This is a demo environment, so we have quite a few different connections. And you can see whether you're connecting to cloud architectures like Azure Data Lake or AWS Redshift, whether you're dealing with flat files like CSVs or Excel documents, whether you're connecting to streaming services like Kafka or big data environments like Hive or HD Insights, QuerySurge has the capability of connecting to all these different types of technologies. These connections are configured in the administration area of QuerySurge and then can be used in any test that you create. You'll see in this example, I'm connecting to an Oracle sales database as well as an Oracle data warehouse, but you can test across disparaging technologies. So I could have Oracle as my source and SQL Server as my target, or a flat file as my source and a Snowflake data warehouse as my target system. QuerySurge is making 2 separate connections, so the databases that you're testing do not have to be linked in any way. Once you've defined your connections, the next step is to put in the query that's going to be used to retrieve the data that you want to test. This query can be typed in manually if you've already using queries for your testing. It will support any native syntax to the technology that you're working with. So because these are Oracle databases, I can use Oracle functions or stored procedures. I can use multiple statements in my request, just like you would in an Oracle script. And if my target side was a different technology, the syntax there would be unique, again, to the technology that we are working with. We also have a query wizard, which I'm going to demonstrate in a minute, which can build these queries for you through a graphical interface that's part of QuerySurge. Once you've defined these queries and have them in place, the next step would be to execute them. And when you execute the query pair, when the result comes back, it's going to look something like this. It's going to tell you the overall status of your test. In this case, this particular test failed. You'll see that it retrieved almost 6,500 records from our source system and the exact same number of records from our target system. So because those rows match up, we have a 0 row count difference, which is good. However, we do have 7 records that have a data mismatch. So out of those 6,500 records that we tested, 7 of them have data that don't match between our source and our target system. Below that, you'll see some basic performance metrics. QuerySurge will tell you how long it took to request the data from your source system, as well as how long it took to request the data from your target system, and then how long it took QuerySurge to do the analysis. And you can see for the total runtime of testing these 6,500 records, QuerySurge completed in a little over 3 seconds. Now, when you're ready to do a deeper analysis and say, well, why exactly did this test fail? We would like to click on the View Query Results button. And when I click on that, you'll see it'll open up a modal window and it will showcase all of the data that came from my source query. And you'll see it. I can scroll through all 6,500 records here if I need to, as well as my target system. So it has all the data that came from my target query. But what we're really interested in are the failures. So if I click on the failures tab, which you'll see, if you recall from the previous screen, we had 7 records that had a data mismatch between our source and target. Well, these are the 7 records on the source side that don't match up with the 7 records on the target side. And you can see most of this looks okay, but if we scroll over, eventually you're going to find some values that don't match between source or target. And this is the reason that this particular test failed. So of course, if you find these types of errors, this is something that you want to pass on to your development team. QuerySurge has the ability to export this data out as either Excel, CSV, or XML documents. We also have an export all button. And what that will do is that will take each one of these tabs and put them into a separate sheet into an Excel workbook. QuerySurge has the capability of finding 2 types of errors. The first is a data failure, which is what's displayed here, where we have a mismatch between our source and target systems. The other type of failure that QuerySurge can capture is what's called a non-matching row. And that would be a scenario where we have a record on either the source or target side that doesn't have a corresponding record to compare to on the other side. So just to showcase that for a minute, I'm going to open up a separate test, and you'll see the results of this test. We have 4,972 records on my source side and 4,976 records on my target side. So that's a row count of 4 that is different, and all 4 records that don't have a match all reside on the target system. So again, if we wanted to see more details on that, we can click our View Query Results button. I can go to that Failures tab, and what you'll see in this case is it's going to display me the 4 records on the target side that don't have a record to compare to on the source side. These could be duplicated, or maybe they were records that shouldn't have come over in the ETL process. But whatever the reason, we have this information and can pass that on to the dev team for analysis. So as I mentioned, when you're building QueryPairs, you can either type in the queries directly, but the other option we have is we have a query wizard. And the query wizard is a graphical interface that will allow you to build and execute these tests. So the first step in the wizard is you're going to define what your source and target systems are. So just like we saw in the query pair, you'll see the same drop-down menu, and I'm going to choose our same environments because this is where we have our sample data set up. So I have my Oracle Sales database as my source, and I'm going to choose my data warehouse as my target. There are 3 types of tests that you could run through the query wizard. We have a row count comparison. That will just compare the number of records between source or target. It does not test the data. This is good for a smoke or sanity test that you may want to run. It'll execute really quickly, and you can do that before you do any more in-depth testing. We have a table level comparison option. This is great for data migration or data modernization projects where you're essentially expecting the data sets to be exactly the same between your source and target systems. And then the first option here, column level comparison. We use this option when we know the schemas are going to be slightly different between our source and target systems. They may have different column names, different amounts of columns in the tables we're testing. So this gives us a little bit more granular detail when we're defining our test. So that's the one I'm going to choose to demonstrate here. So next thing you'll do is select your databases that you're working with. So I'll go ahead and make those selections. And then what you'll see is a list of all the tables in my source and target systems. So what I'm going to do here, just to make it a little easier to see, we have some filtering options. And due to my requirements, I know that there's an orders table in my source system that aligns with a purchase table in my target system. So if I wanted to find a test between the two, simply drag a line between the 2 tables. And that does one of 3 things. It creates the new query pair. This query pair is going to then later be placed in the folder structure that we saw before that contains all of my tests. It's going to show me all of the columns that exist in both source and target tables. And you'll see it starts to construct the queries for me in the bottom left-hand and bottom right-hand side of the screen. So again, I would take my requirements and use them to understand how the data gets aligned. And you'll see I'm just going to make a few different comparisons here. And each time I draw a line between 2 different columns, you'll see that my queries are getting modified down below. I can also apply filtering criteria if necessary. So for instance, if I only wanted to display records from my source where the order was placed this month, I can go ahead and put that filter criteria into my test, and it will add the necessary filtering into your query pair. Once you've gotten the query pair to a state where you think you should be returning data sets that should match up, if you need to create additional tests, it's as easy as dragging another line between 2 new tables. It will go ahead and do that and associating the columns. Once you've built all the different tests that you need to do with the wizard, you can move to the last phase, which is to add them to an existing or new folder in the design library. And we can also set them up into a suite, which we're going to use for scheduling and execution. And I'm going to transition into that section of QuerySurge now. So once you've built these tests, the next phase is to schedule them to execute. So I'm going to open up a specific query pair. What you'll see is this query pair has 9 different, or this suite has 9 different query pairs that are set for execution. You can add additional queries if you want to run in this suite simply by dragging over an individual query pair, or you can drag over an entire folder, in which case it'll add all of these query pairs in that folder to be set up for execution. If you need to exclude a few, you can go ahead and remove them, and you can also save any of those changes. I'm not going to save those changes because it's not something I want to keep. So what I'd like to illustrate is I'm going to look to execute a suite called shipping. You'll see this suite has 5 individual query pairs that are set up for execution. You can run these one of 3 ways. You can either run it on demand, in which case it will execute right away. You can schedule a scenario. So let's say I want to run these over the weekend. I can go ahead and select my date and time. And then you can go ahead and add the suites that you want to run. So not only can I run my shipping suite, which has my 5 tests in it, I can run other suites as well. So maybe I select my demo and my smoke test. You'll see here QuerySurge has it set to run these on any agent. So you can run as many of these suites as necessary for as many agents as you have running. So if I had 3 agents running, all of these suites can run in parallel. But the way a lot of our customers want to run their tests is through some type of event-based execution. So what I'm going to showcase here is I have a Jenkins project. I'm going to kick off a build. And what this has in this project is a pipeline setup that is going to trigger an ETL job. And once that ETL job completes, it is going to then trigger the tests in QuerySurge that need to be run in order to verify that this ETL job ran correctly. So what you'll see is we are at 100% of our ETL job. The next phase of this is to make the request to QuerySurge through our API, and then it's going to pull QuerySurge to give us the current status of the run. So if I toggle...
Eric, can I interrupt just a quick second?
Sure, Bill.
It's 12:59. That means it's 29 minutes. We're not going to end at 1 o'clock. We're going to run over a little bit, so please hang on. Keep going, Eric. Sorry.
So you'll see the query, that suite, shipping suite is executing. You'll see it ran pretty fast. We've gotten all the results back. I can drill in here and showcase any of the results that we got. You'll see the summary metrics on the right, and you'll see the same tabs we saw earlier down at the bottom. So if I wanted to investigate any failures for these particular runs, I can do so. And just like before, it will be highlighted when there are differences. If I go back into our Jenkins job, you'll see that the result of the scenario does get passed back to the build pipeline. So that will tell us when there are issues, and you can put in any type of conditional logic that may be necessary. And you'll get an automatic email notification indicating whether the test was successful. It'll tell you what your pass rate is from a query pair perspective, but it also tells you how accurate your data is. And you'll see all of the summary metrics below. And I'm not going to do it here, but if you click on any one of these links, these have drill down capabilities, and it will take you directly to the query pair results in the scenario. So that concludes the demo portion of our demonstration today. Hopefully it gave you a quick walkthrough of how to design, execute, and analyze the tests within QuerySurge. So I'm going to pause here, and we're going to open it up to some of the questions that came in through the chat window.
Thanks, Eric. Matt Moss, QuerySurge's product manager, is now going to take some of the questions you posted. If you have additional ones, post them in the chat window, and he'll get to them. Matt, all yours.
Great. We had a couple of questions come in. The first question we had come in was about sending automatic email alerts and if that was possible with QuerySurge. So as Eric just finished the demo and showed, within QuerySurge, we have a detailed notification system. You can set those notifications to trigger on specific events such as test failure plus a particular test name, and you can configure what team members get those emails. The email that Eric is showing here is our scenario detail email. All of the hyperlinks will go directly to your results. So if you send this out to a wide group of audience, they just have to click the links to see the raw data behind any of the tests. The reason why we don't include the raw data in these emails is just because you could be testing billions of records, and that might be too large to send an email directly. But you can configure automatic email alerts, completely customizable for your particular testing needs. The next question we got was if we support Azure data resources. And yes, we do test all of the different data components within Azure. This includes items like Cosmos DB, Azure SQL Server, Azure Data Lake Store, as well as blob storage. We have detailed articles on connecting to most of the Azure platform data sources, and you can find those directly on our knowledge base. As Eric is showing right here, we have some examples of connecting to Azure Synapse SQL, and then below it, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and then ADLS below that. So if you have data stored in Microsoft Azure, you will be able to test almost every single one of those data components directly through QuerySurge. The next question that we had was if we support Arvro or Parquet files. and we do support testing of both of those file types. Parquet is a file type that we test via Apache Drill. It's a separate component that you install in QuerySurge, but allows you to write simple queries against your Parquet files without having to do any transformation on the underlying file itself. As Eric is opening up right here, is we have a article dedicated for setting up that particular file type within QuerySurge, connecting to it and showing you how a query would work with it. As Parquet files do exist across different data platforms, we also have an article right below that for Azure Data Lake Store. The next question we have is, how is QuerySurge licensed? QuerySurge is licensed on a named user basis, meaning the users that are going to be inside of QuerySurge creating tests and query pairs, as well as viewing results, will need to have a license for each of those users. We have two main licensing types. The first is our full user, which is meant to be able to create assets and kick off tests. And then we have a participant user, who is only a read-only type account. Participant users are significantly lower cost compared to our full users, and all of our licensing information can be found directly on our website. So if you have any questions on how much it would cost to set up a QuerySurge instance, all you need to do is go directly to QuerySurge.com, and all of our pricing information is found directly on our site. Nothing is hidden behind anything or requires, say, a confidentiality agreement. As Eric is showing you here, we also have package deals which offer significant discounts as you ramp up the number of users you might need. Another question that we have coming in here is if there's any limit on the amount of data which QuerySurge can test. And there really is no limit on the amount of data that can be pumped through our QuerySurge system. The main component in terms of the size of data is the resources that you have available for your QuerySurge server. A machine that may have lower resources will take longer to process the data that's going through. We have many customers that are running billions of records per hour through QuerySurge on a regular basis as part of their ETL process. So you should have no problems testing your big data tables with QuerySurge in a fast and reliable fashion. The last question that I have here is, do we allow for small variances in data between a source and a target? For example, if a revenue metric is off by, say, $1 or $2. Within QuerySurge, all query pairs have the ability to specify thresholds, and thresholds allow you to do a fuzzy match between your source and your target. This way, if you have data that is being loaded incrementally that may not always match, or real-time data, you can actually put a fuzzy match on any number of numeric columns. As Eric is showing you here, you can use either a percent-based threshold, so plus or minus 5%, or you can use an absolute-based threshold, say plus or minus $5. That way, your data does not need to match 100% if you allow some of that fault tolerance. We do have a few more questions in the chat, and just for the sake of time, what we will probably do is email out each one of the team members that have asked that a question and respond to you directly with any questions you might have. So if your questions weren't answered during this webinar, we're going to definitely get back to you via email directly. So feel free to put any more questions or any follow-up questions directly in that Q&A.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks, Eric, for the demo. That wraps up Q&A. Thanks again for your time and participation today. Feel free to join us for any of the other webinars in this 4-part series. Also, we'll be sending a follow-up email to you with a link to the recording and our contact information if you have additional questions. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.